the period of time that I did it early on, I think it was like kind of like you said in Greg's tenure, and so he was kind of setting the precedent of like, yeah, it'd be really, we're going to talk to the players. I honestly, I think towards the end of it, I was having like panic attacks, trying to
Really?
to put yourself out there and be like, hey, I'm trying to make this thing better, and everybody be like, all right, now it's that person is the fixation, like they become fixated on you, and a lot of times it's out of your control.
It's July the 17th, 2024, and you know why you're here, so let's kick this off right and introduce the players. Hey, I'm Jarsar, a wild esports aficionado.
Hey guys, it's Big Moran, and I'm a Wrestle Druid apologist.
Hey guys, it's Trisab Jake, and I've been playing The War Within Gamma.
And today we're joined by a very special guest, Brian Holinka, who was, I believe, lead combat designer on World of Warcraft at Blizzard, now working on a new MMO at Fantastic Pixel Castle. But Brian, why don't you tell the audience about yourself?
Well, yeah, hello. Certainly, worked on WoW PvP for almost 11 years. Or I'm sorry, almost 10 years, not 11. So it makes a lot of sense to be on this show. First venue into working on WoW was maybe the first 5 years. I was just the lead PvP designer, so spent a lot of time interacting with the community and designing PvP, coming up with new features, making everybody cry with balance or other decisions that we made, and then came back after a year away on another project, came back and was lead combat designer, which essentially meant I was lead class designer and lead PvP designer for another like 4 years or so. And then, now working as the gameplay design director at Fantastic Pixel Castle. We're making a new MMO, trying a bunch of new things. We're just in prototype stage right now, very early on. It's a company backed by NetEase, which, as you know, is like the partner who runs WoW in China. We're just, really exciting, trying new things, starting from scratch, kind of being like, if we were making a game from nowhere, what were the decisions we'd make? And that's been a really fun thing to do. Been making games now for close to 20 plus years. So that's really cool. I remember when I first wanted to get in the game design, seeing people who had 10 years and being like, wow, that person's such a veteran of video game dev. So it's really cool to know at this point. I've been doing it for a while. Before WoW, I made 3 shooters, I guess, 3 shooter games. So it's kind of always in the competitive space for the most part. So, yeah.
Cool. Just out of curiosity, because the new game's Project Ghost, right?
That's what we're calling it. Yep.
Yeah. Is there going to be PvP in it?
I think there's going to be some amount of PvP. The PvP, to be fair, PvP is not like the main focus, right? Like I know there are games out there that, hey, their selling point is world, like real full world PvP, like that's the end game. For us, that isn't the end game right now. It's a part of the game that we feel like at launch will be more like, think about how PvP was in World of Warcraft at launch, right? Like it was actually, you could do PvP, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't necessarily the focus of the game, and the parts of the well-established, progression systems and ladders, that all wasn't there at launch. So I wouldn't expect our game to have those things at launch either. One of the things we really want to do at FBC is keep the team relatively small and really involve the player base in like what we do. And so part of that means kind of not having, not having everything at the game, that all at once at launch. So
Makes sense.
one of the things though I'm excited about though, and the potential for PvP in that game is that one of our big hooks is this, what we call blue zones, which are kind of like procedurally generated, MMO zones, right? So think of any MMO zone you've ever been in, and they're very curated, and everybody has the same one, and that kind of makes it this consistent experience, a world that everybody goes into. We want to create those zones, but we want it to be different every time, right? We want people to be able to basically roll as almost like Valheim, creates a new world for you to go explore in. We want to be able to do that for MMO zones, and I think there's potential there to with not a lot of effort, kind of create PvP environments and just say, yeah, there's PvP objectives in here, maybe battlegrounds or game modes. And it's different every time you go in there. And I think that could be a really cool, different take on PvP that we would do initially, or shortly after launch. But we're not planning on having like rated arenas right at launch, if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes sense. And thank you for giving us that little insight into what's happening over at FPC. I know you guys have been very transparent in your design process, which is refreshing, to say the least.
Yeah, it's something Greg, obviously, he was very, open with the community when he was working on WoW and constantly going back and forth. So there's just a bit of, let's do it, let's be open, let's talk about it honest. And I think the danger is twofold. One is that, you say something like, I'm talking here now and we're in prototype and so much could change 3 years from now, right? And the risk is that you talk about things and people either develop their own idea of what it's going to be, or they get excited about an idea and then we move in a different direction. And so you risk the risk is that you don't hit people's expectations and they're like, that's not the game I thought we were getting. And that becomes the narrative, right? Like, oh, they didn't make the game I thought. So if you don't tell anybody what you're making, then what you come out with is what you come out with, right? And so the danger of talking about it is that you create this hype and excitement in people and then you can't live up to it. So I think we just are not worried about that, right? Like part of it is just, if we take everybody on the trip with us and we're real transparent, then there's no like, hey, this isn't what I thought about, because you've seen the game all along, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I like that a lot, actually. But yeah, sorry, you automatically reminded me of the whole, I think it was the, where's my moose? In World of Warcraft, how long it took, where's my moose meme?
Oh yeah,
how long it took to get a moose to be added. So,
or dance studio and stuff like that, or what was the other? Yeah. There's obvious examples there. I mean, it's a great example. Like you talk about, like, hey, we're thinking about putting class, not artifacts. I can't remember what the word that was used, but remember it was like quivers for hunters and librams for paladins. And wrote a cool blog about it, and then it unfortunately doesn't get done for one reason or another, and then people are kind of like, what happened to that?
Hey, I saw on Twitter today someone was asking about a duck mount. Apparently we're promised a duck mount, we never got one.
And I remember a conversation about it, and I thought it was going to be a late stage thing, but I don't know.
It'll still happen. I mean,
hopefully one day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So normally we do a need, greet, and pass as a bit of an icebreaker. I think love to do that with you there, if you don't mind, Brian, though.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so I'm gonna roll right into that. One sec.
This likely won't be a clean fight, so keep your distance, eh?
Yes, so in the agreed pass, one of us will pose a scenario with 3 options, and generally we take turns in saying, out of the 3 options, which one would need, which one we agreed, and which one we would pass on. Just a reminder for those listening live right now or listening at home or on the drive at some other time, don't forget you can also play along in chat here or over on our Discord. But in the meantime, I'm going to toss this over to Jake because it's his turn to present the scenario.
Yeah, it's my turn. I was kind of having a little think about what would be interesting, and I was kind of trying to pull in my collective PvP system experience, and I regrettably realized I have such a small amount because I've been so focused on one particular game for the majority of my life. So I was thinking of some things to do, and I kind of landed on a sort of like League of Legends style 5v5, sort of you're kind of almost like building destruction kind of MOBA style, but from an MMO point of view. As one option. Then a battleground style 10v10. Obviously, Brian, I love that idea of of an ever shifting sort of PvP sort of area. Could be that kind of style. Or the final option, a smaller competitive 2v2, easier to balance, but easier for people to kind of put things together on from a competitive point of view. So those are the three options I've gone for. So who's going to start?
I think I'm going to toss it to Brian here since he's the guest of honor. So might as well put him on the hot seat right away.
Sure. I think I kind of probably need on battleground style stuff. Greed on 2v2 and maybe pass on League of Legends style 5v5. So for me, I just have many fond memories of the things I like about battlegrounds that I've always found appealing is there's this other layer of kind of strategy. It's not just about let's like team deathmatch kill each other. It's like, do I go to objective A or do I go to objective B? How do we react? Where do we place people? And even when you're playing solo in like a random battleground or in a game of Battlefield, right? You can be like, I went to this spot and I helped and I feel smart about it, right? And you feel like that, and that's not a difficult thing to do, right? That's just making a decision. And so that's something a lot of people can do. And I think that's why that type of thing appeals to a lot of players, because it's not always just about your technical ability and your Twitch ability, but it's just making decisions. So that's why I think that's a very important and fun type of game mode that I like. Smaller competitive stuff, 2v2, I think I think 2v2, 3v3, what's really fun about it is you kind of get your crew, you get your little group, your partner, and it's a team-oriented thing, but it's kind of parsable. It's not very difficult, it's not noisy. It's 4 contestants, it's not 10, and so it's very easy to kind of play that in a very quick way. I think that can be a lot of fun. League and MOBAs, I think what's very cool about the MOBAs, and I always enjoyed League of Legends. I actually played, but the thing was I played Dominion more than I played the base League of Legends game. I really loved top-down controls and their class, their hero design, and to some degree. But I never wanted to sit there for 40 minutes. And I did play a good deal of Heroes of the Storm as well. And it was, a smaller, shorter MOBA, and I liked that. But it has these problems. MOBAs have these problems. It's almost like the opposite of like Mario Kart, right? Where you kind of have this snowballing. You can see where this is going to end, right? Like that doesn't happen in sports, where like if you make a 3-pointer, now your accuracy for shooting 3-pointers goes up by 10%. It just plays out flat. And MOBAs they are trying to give you that RPG progression in 30 minutes, which is cool. It just kind of means that it's going to snowball, and if you create systems that are anti-snowball, and I know Heroes did this a lot, it feels contrived, right? And I said it's like the anti Mario Kart, right? Because that's how Mario Kart is. Like if you're in the lead, you get the worst stuff. If you're in the back, you get the best stuff, right? And it tries to like bring everybody together. And it's a party game. It's not like a serious competitive game or anything. But I think I've always just felt like MOBAs just kind of have that problem where, yeah, it feels cool to level up and everything, but you just kind of can see very quickly where the game is going.
Yeah. A lot of competitive Mario Kart people are really angry at you right now, Brian.
They're probably out there somewhere, man.
Yeah, they're seething.
If I've learned anything being on the internet, it's just that somewhere there's a group of people that take something very seriously.
Yeah. I can't imagine who those people would be. I couldn't. My mind is probably. So I feel like Will, Big, do you wanna?
Yeah, I'm actually going. My answers are pretty similar, but I'm actually going to need on 2v2. For me, at least, it's a very nostalgic game mode, just playing with one friend. I really like that, and especially as a healer, you get a lot of agency in 2v2 that you don't really get in other game modes. You know, it really feels like you can have a big impact on the game with your entire toolkit, which I really enjoy. And yeah, I just think that deep connection with one friend, and it's the slow burn that you kind of have to deal with, and it's a very slow paced game, and it has this dramatic finish, and it's kind of like running a marathon. At the end, you're just like you're panting, but you did it. So I really enjoy 2v2. I'm gonna agree on Battlegrounds because I also think they're very nostalgic. Having these, as Brian said, you kind of have these decisions, like the decision trees in Battlegrounds are like crazy compared to Arena. There's so much you can do, and there's always kind of that feeling of going to the drawing board and that tension of trying to figure out a strategy on the fly, which I think is really fun. And I think BGs, more than anything, they feel very cinematic. There's the pacing of Battlegrounds is sometimes very dramatic, where you have these crazy momentum shifts that again you don't really get in Arena in the same way. So yeah, definitely like BGs. I am gonna pass on 5v5, even though I really enjoyed the bracket in World of Warcraft Arena. It's kind of this hybrid game mode in my mind. It wasn't really like Arena, but it wasn't like a Battleground. It was kind of something else. It was like a team fight in a Battleground. That's what it felt like. I really enjoyed it, but yeah, I think 2v2 and BGs have my heart.
That's awesome. So it's interesting. I understand where everybody's going with the League of Legends 5v5 style, but I actually want to agree or need on that because I like that idea, how Jake was presenting it, of like the build and then destroy thing, and I think that's one thing. For almost every MMO with some sort of PvP, it's like here's the map, here's a static area. Boom, two teams go in there and fight and then, achieve some outcome. But none of them really have any sort of thing of where you have to try to build something, really, other than, and I like that idea of having that. And, not just leveling yourself, but like maybe collecting something. So whatever it might be, but getting some sort of resources and then running it back and collecting that to build something up. And I think that'd be pretty cool. So I'm going to actually need on that. And then again, I think everybody knows I'm a lover of Battlegrounds, so I'm going to agree on that because I do enjoy a good Battleground. And that's obviously then I'm going to have to pass on the smaller competitive 2v2, even though 2v2 does have a very nostalgic piece of my heart as well. I always remember doing 2v2 on my Warlock with my buddy. He was a Frost DK in Wrath of the Lich King. And we had no idea what we were doing. We were just going in there and smashing our faces on the keyboard, but it was fun.
I actually have a touching story about TB2. Oh. So in TBC, I played with a friend of mine named Rain, who I met on my server. He healed me in 2v2, and I became friends with him, and he kind of became like my mentor in life in some weird way. And I met him for the very first time at his own wedding. I got invited to his wedding, you know, and yeah, so I met one of my earliest arena partners at his own wedding. It was really cool. I appreciated that.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Wow. Those are the connections I love about this game. Well, about MMOs in general, but
yeah. I one of my 2v2 partners as well was kind of just saying to me literally today that I think he says he thinks he talks to me more than he does his own partner, which is hilarious. But yeah, so my decision. Gareth, so you're right. Like with the
well, I'm just curious. No, I mean it's so great. I think we always talk a lot about how many how friends are made in MMOs and in WoW in particular, in my experience, but certainly in MMOs in general. And it's always a magical thing. I mean, you guys just gave two great examples. I've never quite experienced it myself. I had more of like, oh, I have a real life friend and they invited me to a guild and then I played with these people and we, became friends through that, but never just kind of like organically meeting a stranger. And that's a thing that gets talked, and especially in PvP, which is so aggressive, right? It's such an aggressive kind of format that we're always trying to discover, designers, we're always trying to discover how to make that happen, like almost how to make it happen more. So I'm very curious, whether it's for you all, other instances of people you've just met in the game and how you met in the game, or and like were there things about or in the game that kind of just made that happen? Because that's a magical moment that like we want to promote, right? Like we want to make that happen and kind of create that environment where it does. So always curious about people's experience with that.
Yeah, it's I think it's friendships forged in the fires of hatred for a very specific other class or something like that. I definitely think I bonded with some people over demon hunters, but anyway, yeah, I could go on about that one. So yeah, I think it's great when, in fact, actually, I'm fairly sure a lot of people have met their significant others through WoW as well, which is great. I don't know how many people met through PvP. I'm fairly sure there are people that have. I've seen that happen. It happens for sure. But that's good. I was going to say if I was going to ask you, Brian, if you had the experience yourself, but obviously if you haven't, then yeah, I'm sure you're surrounded by people working on games, and therefore your kind of interactions will be the people that you work with.
Yeah, a lot of especially when I started working at the company, I almost spent most of my time playing with people I worked with, but and I'll tell you that, that's the thing about that team, and I don't know that people really know or appreciate this. Like that whole team plays the game like all the time. Like everybody's playing. They play the game, and that is not the case universally in the video game industry, that like your entire team plays the game religiously. I'm sure there's some other instances of big games that do it. But it really is something special about that game. But so I would play with some people who are friends of theirs, or a lot of the people that work on the class team, the PvP team, they have connections to the esports scene, and so I would stumble into games with folks from the scene, and that was always weird. But
yeah, no, for sure, that makes sense. I think it's really special when you do that, when you do have like those connections, for sure.
I just want to point out the fact that Brian just completely torpedoed the meme that we've had for years that the devs don't actually play the game.
Yeah, for sure. No,
I'm sorry. But they do. I don't know what's other than they do. Oftentimes the thing is they'll have the same complaints. Like you'll have people coming into your office to complain about these things, and then you'll have an hour conversation about it, and there are various reasons that you can or cannot make changes. So it's a game development team is like any other team, right? Not everybody is of one mind or one opinion. You're all working together. It's just like any other job or company,
Yeah. I think some games also have been around long enough that there were people that started playing it when they were younger and eventually grew up and wanted to work on said game and end up do. So like, why would you stop playing said game if you've been playing it since you're 10 years old, So,
and the funny thing is, for me, I had played through up to Lich King, and I was playing Lich King, and my guild was on Lich King, and we're trying to kill him, and we're doing pulls of Lich King, and then my oldest son was born, and I stopped. I quit WoW because I was like, I got a kid, I don't have time for this, and I didn't play all of Cataclysm, and then the job opportunity came up, and so I all of a sudden rushed and had to like play the end of Cataclysm just to kind of catch up on the game again. So I had moved off the game, but yeah.
Wow. That's a great excuse. I'm sorry, honey. I got to play WoW. It's my job. It's
very quickly it became this like, like a big, huge amount waste of time, and the best thing I ever did.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That's good. That's good. I'm really glad you interrupted me, Brian, for that, because that's honestly the best news to hear all that kind of stuff. So I've really enjoyed that bit. I mean, what I'm going to say now is just nothing in comparison. So I'm quickly going to run through my options. I'm going to need probably the smaller competitive 2v2. It's just in my blood. That's just how I was born. Can't change that. That's just 2v2 and 3v3 is my go-to. I like the concept of a 5v5 where it's kind of like a builder spender, like I sort of introduced, kind of in the same way that Gareth was talking about. Quite enjoyed like just a different version of looking at how we do slightly bigger sort of arenas. I say arenas in kind of inverted commas. And I'd probably pass on Battlegrounds just because I did way too many RBGs back in Shadowlands and it ruined it for me. So I'm still struggling with the trauma from that. So there we go.
One of the things that I was always a little jealous of the kind of the MOBA format was, the match ended with you crushing their base, right? Like and killing them all. And I think that was pretty cool, like to have that resolution of not just like you hit an upper score limit or whatever, but you broke their fortress. And I always thought that was a cool natural thing to have kind of happen in the game. I like that about MOBAs for sure.
Well, I mean, MOBAs developed from Warcraft 3, didn't they? As a concept, and I think that's what's really interesting. In my head, I saw like you're playing the peon that I would do, that I would kind of control in Warcraft 3, that was moving around and stuff. And I think that'd be a kind of cool way of coming at it, but it's just it's a different way of thinking.
Indeed. I see people starting to give their opinions on their choices in chat, but I think we should move into let's go back to the subject analysis and actually get back to I guess really continue our conversation about developing PvP.
I'm gonna light you up, sweet cheeks.
Indeed. I don't even know why I write show notes anymore for these kind of episodes, because we just immediately start going into it, and you're passionate about this, Brian. I love it.
Yeah.
We're passionate about it.
Remind people that I do not work on World of Warcraft anymore. Please stop tweeting me about World of Warcraft. But that definitely happens still. I think in Jake's tweet, there's a guy he's probably just going to talk about the new Battleground. I will talk about that. I'm very happy that Battleground's coming out. I'm hoping more as a result. Part of the end. I mean, I understand the cynicism and the skepticism, but it actually, it's difficult to get someone who has experience making levels in a video game and also understands World of Warcraft PvP. I understand a lot of folks in the community are like, well, I could do that, but it's but you also have to demonstrate that you have some experience or knowledge of how to actually work a tool that creates worlds, right? It's not just I can draw a map on a so that took a while to find the right person to do that, and now the right person is doing it, and I'm so excited for them, and I really hope that this is the first of many. I mean, just as a fan of the game, I look back on my time on the game, and I consider my biggest failure that like we didn't make more battlegrounds. Like I just didn't get that done until I left. So I'm happy it's happening, and I hope everybody does have a good time with the new battlegrounds.
So that was going to this is a complete tangent off of what anything we but for your past experiences, but also I mean now you're into this new job, this new experience. But from a design perspective, obviously you need to have the right tools. You need to have the right person that can use those tools. A person or a team that can then turn those, take that idea and make it functional. And at the same time, all of that takes, it has a cost to it, right? It costs time, it costs money. So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but generally it seems like the way game design is done today is run like a project where there's people that are focusing on the amount of scope, there's time limitation, there's a budget that's been put to it, and eventually stuff starts to run out and decisions have to be made, right? So is historically, is that how many boundaries or obstacles have you felt designing PvP where one of those constraints, be it the scope, be it the time, or be it the cost, has constrained you from being able to do that thing that you wanted to do?
Yeah, when you kind of consider like making an MMO, probably the one of the biggest costs is creating the world, right? And the world's really the star of the show, right? When you're in an MMO, whether it's Final Fantasy or World of Warcraft or Elder Scrolls Online, when a new expansion comes out, you're excited to go to the new place. Right? Like, oh, there's new place and new enemies and new stories and new adventures. Like, we've all gone to this club for 2 years. We are ready to go to a new club and hang out there instead, right? And so creating that space, right, that is beautiful and has a lot of story to it. It takes a lot of different people with a lot of different skill sets to do, right? Like you have what are called world artists who world builders. So those are the people who are literally in a tool kind of sculpting the terrain, right? Like they're saying there's a hill here and there's roads there, and they're working with the narrative designers to say, what are these parts of the world that we're creating, right? Like what is the story here? Who lives here? And those sorts of things. And then you have world artists who have to come in and they're going to make it beautiful, right? Like they're going to put trees in the right place. They're going to set lighting. They're going to do a great job texturing the terrain and all those things. And then, yes, you have some type of engineers who, if there's something special about the world that needs to be supported, they work on that. And the thing is, that same skill set applies to, let's say, creating world PvP zones, right? And so you have to have someone who understands line of sight and call outs and, creating a space that feels like a real space in a world, and not just like because, if you're going to fight in a battleground, you want to fight in something that feels like, yeah, this is a place people really want to fight over, but also feels fair and balanced, but not overly symmetrical. And the player knows where they are at all times. They can look up on the horizon and know like, oh, that's the big tree, so I know I'm facing this direction. And they're not overly reliant on a map. And understanding all of that stuff can, there's a real skill and knowledge there. And they're shared. And so when you think about that, the main thing about shipping like an MMO expansion is creating those worlds. It's very hard to say, let's take somebody off creating the thing, the world that everybody's going to go experience, and make a smaller PvP version of it. It just isn't as high of priority, right? Unless someone decides it's a priority. And so that was always a very difficult thing, is that, hey, 100% of the people are going to experience this content. We've got to make sure that's terrific and nails it, right? And so that was always kind of the challenge. Awesome.
I feel like we could talk about this for hours. I wish we had like a whole day to do this. I know, Big, you have some very good questions though that you've been
I think
patiently waiting.
Related to sort of community expectations about game design is obviously balance. And I think balance is obviously a difficult thing. And I had just one particular question about, balancing certain specs versus other specs in games. So sometimes there are specs or classes or characters that have like a really high skill ceiling, so they're a bit harder to pick up, but they also have, they're harder to master, but they also have a high skill floor, so they're harder to pick up. And maybe something like Sub-Rogue is an example in WoW PvP, where in the hands of a really, really good player, the toolkit of a Sub-Rogue is amazing. You can do a lot if you have a lot of game knowledge. You can have high impact on the game. Now, if you aren't as proficient, if you're new to a spec like Sub-Rogue, it's going to maybe feel a bit weaker to some more brawler type melee who can just, press W and swing their axe.
Yeah.
So this presents like a balancing problem. Do we balance it for the high end of the ladder, who is doing really well with this spec, and that means would it possibly mean nerfing it, or do we buff it for the underperforming lower end? Like, how do you resolve that problem?
Yeah, I think so. I would say in a perfect world, like a new MMO, because what's really, I think, hard about like WoW in particular is just 20 plus years of history and player knowledge and like where the classes are at and and how attached to one spec or another players are. It's just a super tough problem, right? Like everybody may be attached to a very specific spec on their class, and let's say whether it's Sub-Rogue or Arms Warrior or Havoc Demon Hunter, and like I think a lot of attachment in WoW is more fantasy driven than a lot of people in high-end competitive or high-end PvE really appreciate. But like the real appeal of playing classes of World of Warcraft is just like the awesome fantasy of like, this is the character I want to be and I feel so good doing it, that people are very attached to that, and they all want it to be, they want all of them to be viable, right? Like you are really attached to this fantasy, you want to feel good about it, and you don't want to feel like you made a decision, this decision that you made is now letting your friends down because, oh, I really love shooting fireballs out of my hands, I don't really like shooting purple balls out of my hands, but because of the way the game is, I guess I got to shoot purple, and now I don't like the game so much, right? So I think there's this desire to really make everything equally viable. In a perfect world, if you're asking me what I would love to see is, I do think there, and it's always a question of how much, but if more is asked, then it's if there's higher risk, there should be higher reward, right? Like if a higher skill is required, then the payoff should be higher. There was always, like, Sub-Rogue is of course the example of like, we would look at Sub-Rogue just blowing people up, and the question was always like, well, how much did they have to do to make that happen, right? And it was always a pretty complex, hey, you have to hit all these things at the right time, and when you do it, bam. And versus other cases where it was like literally somebody just pressed 2 buttons and they do an equal amount of damage. But like if you're telling me you had to set up something over 8 seconds and hit the buttons in just the right order, and when you did it there was a huge payoff, like, that's fun. But the problem is the person on the other side, all they really see is, look at this one, entry in the combat log that says, 250k or whatever. And so that creates problems. So I think the long answer to the question, I think, is that in a perfect world, when more skill is required, I think it's totally fair to say there's, better, maybe that's just what it takes to be at the highest end requires making the choice of the very high-end class, right? But I think there are people who they'd be unhappy. That would make some people very unhappy because they may not like that class for whatever reason, or that spec or whatever. So I think a perfect world would be try to deliver that fantasy and deliver like, this is the sky, the high level, the high skill ceiling version of it, and this is the low skill ceiling version of it, and you can play both of them either way that you want. But really, the person who's going to be probably more successful at the highest end is going to have more demands on their skill, if that makes sense.
And it's in.
Yeah, I'm sorry. One thing is, it's always a question of like, how much more are we asking, and how much more does it give you, right? Like, if it's twice as good, then it's not a question of like, oh, can you play the easier version of the spec? It's like, well, it's twice as good. You got to play the harder version. So it's very easy to talk about, but hard to actually hit that numerical measure.
It's funny what you mentioned about WoW being more fantasy driven than most people appreciate. And I think that really is, you can really see that in the attitudes people have towards specific classes. Because I do think there's this whole cosmology of PvP MMOs that kind of operates in the background. And I'll give an example, like people really don't like rogues. Like people have very strong opinions of rogues. And if you kind of think of what a rogue is from a fantasy point of view, it's like a thief. It's like a cheater. It's someone who is like exploiting you. And so naturally you're not going to like this character because they're this sort of trickster, right? Compared to something maybe like a paladin. It's like, oh, how could you be mad at a paladin? You know, they're riding the horses. They're the honorable people.
Yeah.
So I think there's that whole element that a lot of people don't realize, that there's this whole cosmology behind a lot of their belief systems about balance. Also, I think another thing too is when it comes to nerfing something or buffing something, it's kind of hard to buff or nerf the right thing. Again, going back to Rogue, you know, I've seen a lot of people talk about nerfing cheap shot. You know, reduce the duration of cheap shot or something by 1 second. It's too long. Well, that creates this giant ripple effect downstream for everything else that happens to the rogue. You know, that 1 less second means, well, their damage is nerfed because now they have to restun earlier. Their defensives are nerfed because they don't have as much lockdown. So it's like you get this crazy ripple effect, I think, that people don't realize. And I think sometimes when we read patch notes, we're like, that's a weird change. But sometimes maybe that weird change is like the best, at least most like, or least destructive change. Would that be maybe a good way to view it?
I think so. I mean, the challenge with the rogues is always they have this toolkit that's amazing in PvP, is not as amazing in PvE. Their damage is largely tuned around being equal in PvE, and so that meant we were always kind of like, well, then they're gonna have this control in PvP, they don't get to have all that damage, right? And then that would make the rogues unhappy. I think when for better or worse, I would say there are a lot of changes that would happen to WoW classes that, like, whether there were a change made in PvE that affected PvP or a change in PvP that affected PvE, and it kind of like forced a meta change on like the game. And honestly, I think it was just for the best. I know oftentimes it would be like, why would that change happen? I'm so mad. But like there is some amount of like, it's chaos in introduced to the system a little bit, where change happened and now the game's different, and that's probably keeps it fresh a little bit, even if it felt infuriating at times. Like, I don't understand why this happened, and it's just kind of like, well, game's different now, and I get it. I get when you feel very passionately about these things, that feels very frustrating, but when you think about it, the game's been around for 20 years. It survived those things.
You have to, it's kind of like it kind of imitates real life. It's sort of like adapt, evolve, or stagnate and disappear, I suppose, in a way. But I've got a question actually for Big. If people are kind of biased depending on what class you are, does that mean that you hate the environment if you hate Resto Druids?
What?
You hate Resto Druids, does that mean you want to chop down trees?
I guess maybe it does. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway.
Just hate our treants. So, yeah. Jake, you've been quiet though. Do you have a?
I have been. I didn't prepare a question. I feel like I feel like I don't want to shock Brian with my random rambling of things. But actually, to be honest, I did. Well, I have one thing. I did think of something, Gareth. So don't worry. I did think of one thing. I want to ask you. We talked about, the design that you wanted to take with your new game, in that you kind of came at it with like a blank canvas. Like how do you do that? How, when you go into design anything like that, okay, we're a load of veteran game designers coming in.
Yeah.
We want a blank slate. Like, where do you start? Like, what is that first thing that you actually try and pinpoint?
Well, you kind of create like kind of vision statements and goal statements of like, what do we want the game to be, right? I think one of the kind of big, and actually I just don't have it right in front of me, but one of the things I think about MMORPGs, and I think this is kind of what the team thinks is, it's about going on adventures with your friends. Like, it's about getting deep into this power fantasy, these cool classes, and then just going through a world and doing that with your friends. And so that kind of drives a lot of other like kind of sub goals. It's like when we're talking about going on adventures with your friends, right? Like, we're not saying like, well, only your good friends, like only your friends who are really like it, are awesome at video games. Like, if you think about like Elden Ring, part of that is like, we want to create challenging combat, that really tests people and they feel satisfied for their accomplishments in the game. And that is, I think, a higher level goal for them than perhaps ours, which is just like, yeah, we want you to go adventure through the world. And so that kind of dictates like, all right, so what do we want combat to be and to feel like? And part of it is like, well, we want it to feel approachable. Who's our audience? Our main audience is core MMO players, people who have played Final Fantasy or World of Warcraft or Elder Scrolls Online or many of these other popular MMOs, Guild Wars 2. Those are the people who know who Greg Street is, and they're going to play our game. So that's the type of person we're making a game for. So that's going to kind of define, all right, what is the vision for our combat model, right? And what do we want to do and accomplish there? So you start kind of listing out a bunch of goals and kind of developing this vision for what you want combat to or part of the game to be. I'm just going to talk about combat because that's like the main thing I've been focused on right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
And then we just kind of, I like make slides and stories of just like, to describe to people what combat is going to be like. Just literally made like PowerPoint pictures of characters running around and kind of telling the story. Oh, you press, you see the monster and you look at it and then it becomes your target, and you press this button to open up on it, and then it starts casting this spell, so you press your special counter button, and just kind of make a story of how like a typical engagement will go, just kind of give everybody an idea of how you envision things working out. And then, just a lot of, and then just sort of organizing, like, what are all the things we need to do to get that done, right? And just kind of breaking it down into tasks of everything that needs to, and kind of start sorting that out and prioritizing it. What do we think is the most important thing? What is a part of the game? Like during prototype, what we talk about is, let's do the things that we can't make a decision on unless we see it in game ourselves, right? I can, you can, if there's another game, like you have an idea and you can see it in another game somewhere already, like just go look at it and say, I like that, or I don't like that. We're going to add that to our game, or we're not. And then that can wait to what's called pre-production. But if there's something that we're like, this isn't in any other game, like Blue Zones is a great example, where we can evaluate how it's going to work. We've got to implement that. And so that's what we spend our time during prototype implementing, so we can evaluate, is this working? Do we know what we want to, how we want it to work? Then in pre-production, we start working on basically laying the groundwork for the game. Like that's when we actually start working on things that you can see in other games, and we've got to do our own version, and we've got to make it, really awesome. So that's kind of a really kind of wordy ramble on how that's all done. But ultimately
No.
the first thing that you do is just kind of create a PowerPoint that says this is the vision of the game, and it's all words and pictures.
That's awesome. Honestly, I think I'm actually so excited for those blue zones. I feel like that like a ever shifting sort of battleground PvP sort of area that has a lot of things involved is something that could be really, really interesting for sure.
Yeah, and you know, I think one of the big things that we wanted to do on the combat side is we're trying to make a game that will be familiar, but feel like it's kind of fresh and the modern day version of MMO combat that you've seen. You know, like we, for one thing, trying to make it playable on a gamepad. There's a lot of players, whether it's, you know, the game ends up on console or not. There are a lot of players. My son's, one of my sons, you know, he doesn't really like mouse keyboard. He just likes gamepad. And so that means that, you know, we might not be challenging the dexterity of, you know, a WoW player who can handle 30 different keybinds, you know, at a moment's notice. And so we've got to find other things to fill it in. Like if you don't have to make this, you know, 30x decision tree on what you're going to do, what is filling your time? And so a lot of things we've been spending time on now is really sorting out what are the different options that you can have, like interacting with the world and positioning, and do we want line of sight to be a thing, or it's more important? And but there's just it's a lot. Like if there are less spells and abilities, we've got to find something else for you to spend your time doing and thinking about.
Yeah. So very much a Demon Hunter friendly game then.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Good. They're very happy as far as I can tell.
There's two things. One, rolling back, Brian, you just gave me a new version of what death by PowerPoint means. So
yeah,
I like
That's
it.
absolutely right.
Building and leading on to what you just said about your kids and thinking about like today's young gamer seems to, like, again, very into the mobile space, very much in the pick up, play and drop. You know, it's a lot of the gamer space that they seem to be drawn into, especially ones that have, you know, perhaps low dollar cost but high time cost. How is that, like, because again, leaning back to what, you know, you played World of Warcraft right at the very beginner days, you said, and like it was fresh and new. It took a great take on a bunch of other MMOs at the time, built on the good things, made other great systems, brought these huge communities together. We had huge guilds. People were running around the world and chatting to each other across the countries, and it was fabulous. And I think that we're really well with the mind space of the gamer at the day, but now everybody's into the solo space. So how do you make an MMO with a solo, you know, a solo gamer? It takes somebody who's willing to, you know, to then build a community, build into this worldview, but then also want to go past that PvE world that everybody first gets enticed by to then want to PvP.
Yeah.
That's a very big question, I know.
Yeah, but it was. I think I may have to come back and ask for clarification on the second part of bringing them from PvP to PvE, from PvE to PvP. But on the first part, I think what is pretty interesting, you know, when you think about when WoW came out, like Facebook wasn't a thing, Discord wasn't a thing, like you didn't have that online space that you have now. So to just like AFK in the city was like no big thing, right? Like you would do that and just like maybe you watch, you know, do something else and just chat with your friends. You kind of wanted to be there. Like that was your way to be online and connect with people, right? And now I just feel like people just have so many other ways to do that if they want. So it's more about actually doing things. And when I see my kids, I have a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I think kind of in the like feel like kind of in the 9 to 12 time frame, like in that age for them. Well, Minecraft or Fortnite, those were the big the games for them, right? And you know what's kind of interesting, at least about Minecraft, I feel like, in some ways it's it's almost like, well, what if you could have an MMO that was private? Like, because you could bring as many people as you wanted to a Minecraft game. And but you're once again going on adventures with your friends, right? Like that. And they just times did it in creative mode. They didn't always play survival. They did all these different things, and so they were still online hanging out, right? And I feel like when we've actually done some studies looking into like, what do these Fortnite players think of MMOs, right? Like if they hear the word MMO, like, one, they just think like there's such a reputation that like, oh, that's a game you just like poop sock, right? Like you're playing that. If you play an MMO, you got to sit down for 4 or 5 hours to play. Like that's kind of their thought about it. It's also that it's for old people, like you and me, graybeards, right? Although I know that young people do play it. But there's that, it kind of has that stigma a little bit to it, because like, yeah, you can jump on and play a dungeon in World of Warcraft or an arena or whatever, and you can do it in like the same amount of time that you would play a Fortnite match. Like absolutely. So it's weird that that lack of understanding, but to get to that content, right, what do you have to do? Well, you got to level your character up from 1 to 60.
Yeah.
And that's something that takes a super, super long time to do. So there's always that real challenge in MMO design of like, players want their time investment to matter, and they also want to get through that time investment as fast as possible, right? Like almost rendering it meaningless. And that is a very, and that time investment is important for making your character and your time feel valuable and making your character feel more powerful. But at the same time, if you want your friends to come in, the time investment that's like a blocker to accessibility in a sense. Not in the sense of disabilities, but in just the sense of getting more people to play the game.
Yeah,
I think the second part of your question was about like bringing people from like. Do you want to talk about?
Yeah. How do you entice let's say a young gamer, let's say in the 12-year-old, gets into the game. They start loving the character, so they go through that whole class fantasy, create that bond with their character. Now they get to max level. Unless they are, introduced into PvP along that pathway, generally it seems like they're now max level, and then they immediately, that is leveling dungeons. Maybe you hear people talking about the raid, so that's in forefront of mind. Like unless PvP is as part of that pathway, that journey to max level. How do you entice that person to then make that leap from running dungeons and running raids, or doing the PvE content, to hopping over to doing world PvP or instance PvP? It's sort of tough. This is sort of tough thing, because I've certainly spent a lot of time trying to get more people who just did PvE to do PvP, and I'm sort of the mind that certainly just some people don't like it, right? Like some people just they do not like the idea of someone else killing them. That's not what they're here for. Like they have goals they want to accomplish, and they don't want to do it. There are others, I think, who look at it, people who do enjoy PvP games, and they say, why would I want a balanced competitive game to prove my abilities. And I just want to get right to that. I don't want to do all this stuff you're talking about, right? And so those people get turned off by the MMO PvP experience. I think I feel like focusing on like
hey, how do we get more of these people to do PvP, is less important than just saying like, listen, there are people who want to do PvP. Like there are people who they enjoy MMOs and they enjoy leveling up characters and be invested, and they also love then fighting with other people like that. And so I think just creating content that those people are happy to play and enjoy is just valuable, because it is just another activity for those people to kind of enrich that game. And so, you know, I think I understand that, like, you know, if you like something, you want other people to like it too, right? Because you want to be validated that, like, this thing I like is cool. And and especially in this kind of day and age, everybody's like looking at the numbers on everything and they can have a lot of visibility into how popular everything is. And so there's some degree of like, you know, how do we grow this thing? But I think in the case of MMO PvP, it's like it's so challenging to get everybody over that hurdle of, I'm a person who loves time investment in an RPG, and then also now I'm also one of those people who likes competitive stuff. It's a small group. It's a smaller group of people, and I think just focusing on that group of people and making stuff they like, that's just what's most important. And you know,
that makes sense.
Alternatively, you could just kind of find out, well, what don't you like about the current offering, and try to offer them something different, right? Like, I think the fantasy, and this is so difficult to deliver on, but I think the fantasy a lot of MMO players have of PvP is 1,000 of us are lined up over here, 1,000 of us are lined up over there. We're gonna crash into each other and have like a 3-hour long battle, and it's gonna be glorious. And you know, we're both gonna feel like we had it was a great time, and in the end, we won. And you know, like, that is really tough to do. I mean, so many games. There's a graveyard of games that have tried to do that. But I think that is probably the format of PvP that your average person would rather do, because it is very intimidating to walk into the arena when, you know, you don't feel like you're a very good player of the game, but you just enjoy playing the game with your friends. So you don't want to get into the arena. So I think there are people who, they're in the heyday. I know people, it's a bad word, Ashran, but like in the heyday of Ashran, there were these pre-made groups, and there are huge, large communities, and grandmas, and, you know, people who didn't PvP, but they loved this large community they were in, where they would just steamroll Ashrans, right? And those people loved that format. So I think that is probably the untapped format for MMO PvP that I think could draw more people in, but very difficult to do, very difficult to design, very difficult to test. I mean, it's not like you can just say, hey, we're going to play 100v100 5 times a week and just really dial it in. It's a tough thing to do, but
and then also have the hardware being able to handle that, because that's like,
it is. And you know, when you have
Rune Gaming would bring servers to their knees when they try to portal in for a world PvP event.
Yes, and the game, you know, the game has over the years become more complicated. Like your average character running around, you just see it in Classic. You know, the number of auras they run around with in Classic versus the modern game. It's just each character is a lot more demanding.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And there was a question I had there as a follow-on, but now I can't remember what it was, so that's okay.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
I just thought,
I love these conversations.
based off of what Brian said, is that there's going to be a load of grandmas running around in World Classic. That's for sure. running around Ashran.
I do see there is a question in the chat about you know, hard splitting PvP from PvE balance, and what that does to a game. So I think it's a reasonable thing to do. I think the challenge is, you know, someone understanding like how their character just plays, right? and the risk of like I hit this button and my expectation is that it does twice as much damage as my other button.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go magically just into this other game mode, and now that's not the case. And for those people who are in the high end and very invested in the game and are looking at it on Twitter all the time, like they're like, good, I understand that. But for the average person, and there are a lot, there are a lot of people who are not super highly engaged, like it's jarring.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I firmly believe in is that numbers largely, I'm speaking against myself here, but like a lot of times people don't know, like big numbers, they just don't even know. They're just not really tracking the numbers anyways, right? So like if the number's 20% lower, they're like, especially if there's variability, like maybe I crit, maybe I didn't, maybe I have a damage mod on me, maybe I have, there's just 5% variance in attack. The numbers are all over the place. So if they kind of get reduced, in a PvP setting, that's okay. I think totally redesigning a rotation, like, I'm gonna, and you walk into PvP and now this thing's up 15% and that's down 20% and the game just plays that's not great. I think that's not good because, the game is just so different and all you did was just walk into a different game mode. The things that I would put my foot down on were certainly cool, like a cooldown, right? Like if something had a 60-second cooldown, it's got to have a 60-second cooldown everywhere because that's the rhythm of the game. That's, how things play out. And I don't really love the idea that rhythm just changes mysteriously. So I think that would, yeah. Oh.
So how do you feel about cooldown reduction then?
Like reduce a cooldown.
Yeah. So let's say you have
like a PvP specific like piece of gear that you're equipping, or just like magically.
Either be
like,
like
rogues, for instance,
okay. Yeah.
outlaw rogues, when they spend combo points, they reduce the cooldown of their abilities by the number of combo points they spend, where cooldowns become variable.
Yeah. But that's
because it's definitely proven to be very strong. It's definitely proven to be very strong in PvP, where if you can reduce a cooldown, that's no matter what it is, it feels really good always.
Gotcha. I mean, I would say that's not something I would love to do differently in the two different game modes. I would try to look for other solutions first. For sure.
Fair. That's fair. Sorry, yeah. I know with a lot of PvP players, there's, well, the ones that I've talked to so far, which is again all based around Warcraft, but I think this goes for a lot of other games, where if there's a big ability that has a cooldown that can possibly damage, that a lot of players like to have an opposing ability to defend against it. So they like to have that yin and yang of defensive versus attack. And when you have something that then does a reduction on a cooldown that then desyncs that, where then a person is able to push another ability and a person can't defend against it, that's where that feels bad, I think. And I can see that, like in PvE, that doesn't matter because it's a dance. The boss is always going to do an ability at XYZ time. Versus PvP.
Yeah, what's interesting there, I guess I have two thoughts there. One is, I remember a time when the kind of cry, the universal cry was like, every game is scripted. Every game feels like it plays out exactly the same. And largely that was because the cooldowns all lined up, right?
Right.
And so having some variability in the cooldowns and that kind of disrupting that, as long as it feels like players have an impact on that cooldown kind of mismatch, I kind of feel like that would be desirable, right? At least in that. But I understand that, like, I don't have I had a thing, but like really in PvP with cooldowns, what you're hoping to have is this kind of which you don't always have, is this kind of ability to bluff, like when and try to pull out the cooldown and then feel like you're at an advantage. But yeah, certainly that particular mechanic, I can see why it's challenging. But it's also one of those things that, like, I feel like these things sort of happened in WoW a number of times where, like, yeah, this was how this class always played, but now they're good. And so now that particular mechanic is in the spotlight as like, well, this is too good. And it's like, well, it's been that way for like 3 expansions, but I get it. Now they're strong. I don't know if that's
Brian, you're speaking my language right now, because as a resto druid for the past God knows how many years, 18 years, I think.
Yeah.
People right now are complaining about Cyclone, and it's like, man, don't change that. That's been my bread and butter. But it's funny because no one really complained about Cyclone too much back in the day. But it's like now that druids are really good, it's like, well, here's this thing, like, take it away.
Yep. No, that will happen, and that happens a lot. And so I think one of the tough things about balancing any game, and anybody else, is that there's kind of like objective data, and then there's just like kind of community perception management, right? In the end, you could. We can look at the data and say, like, well, actually, we're looking at things and it's totally, balanced. But, players have a perception that things are one way, and it's largely driven by the data they have in front of them. The example I always would give is the healer, number of healers in Battlegrounds, right? Like that became like a big point of contention at some point. And it was like, well, all of a sudden we had to fix this problem that had been in the game for 15 years, but players had became really fixated on, they have 1 healer, or they have 3 healers, we have 1. This is unbalanced. And, who knows how good any of the players are, or it didn't matter, right? Like the only thing you could really look at objectively was they have 3 healers, we have 1. This is unbalanced. Yeah. And so whatever you kind of provide to players, like another example is healing, right? Like it's on the scoreboard that this paladin healed himself for this much, and my warrior can't do that. Well, how much damage mitigation happened, right? Like from defensive stance, like just reducing all damage by 5% over the course of a match. Is that tracked anywhere? Does anybody look at that?
Nope.
No, right? And so since it's not on the scoreboard, there's a fixation on the data that you have, and that kind of drives player perception, right? And so you kind of have to act against that, right? Act with it. And so when things like this happen, I think you have to kind of evaluate, like, all right, is Cyclone really a problem, or is that just something that's special and they've always had it and it's special? And we've worked around this in the past, and that sort of thing can kind of you just have to decide when you're going to stand your ground and when you're not. But I think it's very it can always be very dangerous to make, especially in a game that's been around for a long time, to make changes that something is so beloved to people, because people are pretty attached to that stuff. Just like we talked about, they're attached to their class. So there was a producer who would message me about deep freeze, every chance she could get. She wanted deep freeze back, and just there's an issue of like, it's something we took away that I felt pretty passionate, and y'all can blame me for deep freeze. If it's back because I'm gone, if it's back because I'm gone, I definitely held the door on deep freeze for years. But yeah,
I'll message Vin Rookie after this. Let him know it's you. It's Zaryu, actually. Zaryu was passionate about it.
It was Zaryu, Zaryu really wanted to. Yeah,
he did.
A lot of angry mages everywhere, for sure.
So. Again, leaning into we're talking a lot about classes and everything. The class, the Holy Trinity, right? Your tank, DPS, healer. how hard is that? Like what's the impact for that on PvP?
Yeah,
and for the good and for the bad.
Yeah, I think it's it's very tough. I think hero DPS is great, right? Like works great in PvP and in all formats. If you just had DPS and healers, I think the challenge, because we're actually talking about this a lot in our game, about kind of the roles of tanks. We're going to have tanks, we're going to have healers, we're going to have DPS or damage dealers, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we want to do with the game is really try to not, as much as we can, protect the thing about the role that is critically important. Like the healers restore health bars, right? And as much as we can, let's let that be their thing so that they're needed. Because what's valuable then is I made the decision to play a healer, so I'm very valuable to this group. Mm-hmm. The damage dealer just going to be way better killing stuff, right? And that's very valuable. But like we should not be handing out too much heals to them so that they still feel beholden to the healer. Tanks are the tricky one, right? I think the traditional MMO tank is largely one that just says, and kind of the fantasy that a player has when they play a tank is literally like, I'm just going to jump in and smash people in the face, right? Like, and you can punch me all day long and I'm not going to die, right? Like that is someone who, has never played an MMO before, and they are creating a character and they see a guy and he's in a lot of armor and he has a sword and shield. His mindset is, this is going to be awesome. I'm going to be invincible. Like that is the fantasy, right? And that doesn't work really great in PvP, right? I think where I thought it worked, I think MOBAs actually were really good tanks, because it's so much about being out in front and initiating and creating the fight and kind of controlling the battle space, largely because there was collision in MOBAs. And so even whether it's in PvE or PvP, we are trying to dig into how does our tank interact with the monsters? Is there an evolution? Is there something new we can do with tanks? We can always just say, you deal damage and then the monsters, have an aggro bar and they just basically, whoever's highest on their aggro table, that's who they fight, and tanks just deal more aggro. We can do that, right? But it would be nice to kind of like, I always use this bar fight analogy, right? Like if the four of us were to walk into a bar and start fighting with, 4 other guys, they're hopefully not all gonna like attack Jake and just leave the other 3 of us to kick them in the butt, right?
No,
like that's not what's gonna happen. We're probably gonna square off one-on-one, right? And maybe even by size, right? Like when the Avengers fight Thanos's minions, right? Like the Hulk and the big Thanos dude, they fight each other. And so is there something more analogous to that we can do with tanks? To work kind of more on control and mitigating damage, like could reducing damage be the arena of tanks, restoring health be the arena of the healers, and obviously killing people be the primary thing damage dealers do. And maybe that would be a healthier world for PvP to be in as well, right? Because now it isn't so much just that like the tank is an immortal god and now you have to deal with that, and he's an immortal god that can't do anything, and that's essentially where you have to drive the tank in PvP. But really I felt like generally, at least in my time on WoW, that this was an issue that the players spoke pretty clearly on, that how they wanted it to be. And so we largely took the cue from the player base that like they don't want it. They don't want it in an arena. We'll try to make them playable, but not top end viable.
Yeah, which I think that worked. definitely when it came to WoW. But yeah, I think the biggest part is just it was annoying for people to try to deal with something that was built to be a aggro monster and a disruptor. And yeah, I can see, but I get, yeah, you're right. Like, wait, if we go into a bar fight, I really hope they all chase after you there, Brian, because you're big and strong, and they, I'll just stand in the back and throw rocks.
It's gonna be a bar fight against the Mario Kart enthusiasts.
That's right.
Yeah. That's our real enemy. They're the ones approaching us in the bar. They're very upset. Indeed.
So I know, thank you for giving us as much time as you have, Brian. I know we've gone well beyond what we originally agreed upon, but I very much thank you for that. We always end our subject analysis, though, on the one thing we would change. So I'm going to tune this to more of an a very generalized PvP thing. But as far as maybe in the general sense of PvP and PvP systems, if there's one thing that you had, like ultimate power and decision making and unlimited resources to make it happen, what would be something that you would change about the PvP and the systems in pretty much any game? Or
and I've thought a lot about this for our game, because certainly would like to support PvP in some way, and I think I think this comes down to rewards in my mind, and having parallel reward systems I don't think is healthy for either parts of the game. So specifically just the fact that everybody wanting it to be equitable, and that I have found just generally that if you make a piece of content and then you say, hey, we did this content and we also have a PvP version of it, and then trying to figure out the rewards for that, right? Well, as we talked about, some people just don't like PvP, and so they're not going to do it, and so they don't want to be forced to do it. So, but PvP is a deterrent, so you should probably reward the PvP version a little bit better. And what is the exact number there that works, that makes people who do the PvP version feel like it's fair, and the people who aren't doing it don't feel obliged to do it. It's a magical number that's really hard to hit. So I don't like parallel reward systems, like saying there's a PvE version of the reward system and a PvP one. So I'd rather see PvP have its own vector on rewards, and just kind of if whether that means gear kind of comes from PvE, but PvP has its own one slot that is just only from PvP or something. I'm just not all completely been thinking about this problem, so I don't have a excellent design just yet. But whether it's prestige in PvP or something along those lines, I just think largely I would not want to go down the road again of trying to design two equal systems for rewards. That's the main one.
All right. That sounds like a very tough problem. That's definitely going to take a lot of time to figure out.
It is. I mean, there are times where my imagination was, you walked into this Coliseum and it was literally leave your guns at the door and go to your locker and get all your stuff that you've earned in the Coliseum over there and put that on, but anyway, but people want this stuff out in the world, so not gonna do something like that. So
if you're enticing collectors and you're giving people things to collect, and then they're going to use that for their EPing, then they want to be able to flash that wherever they can. So it makes sense
for sure. Or they want to fight each other out in the world, and they don't want to feel like they were at a disadvantage. I'm a good PvPer. When we fight out in the world, I should have an advantage. So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Big. Is there anything you change?
Yeah, I'm still waiting to get my paycheck to make a documentary about WoW PvP. I think it would be amazing to have something like that, because I think storylines are really important for PvP games. Being able to sort of tell the lore and history behind some iconic players, I think is just, for me at least, a really cool idea. I mean, it's, if you pay attention to Super Smash Bros, there's a Smash Bros documentary, which is kind of attributed as something that created a massive resurgence in Smash Bros Melee. You know, an old game for the GameCube that is played on CRT TVs. So I think, you know, if you're able to tell really cool storylines and kind of get people interested in sort of characters and, you know, the gladiators, I think that's really cool and really motivating for at least a particular type of player. So making a PvP documentary is what I want to do.
I like it. I can't wait for you to make that, Big.
You need help?
And I'm just waiting for my novelty check, you know, to come in the mail for $1 million or whatever it takes. That's it.
Jake, what's the one thing you change?
Oh man, I think I actually, you know what? I feel very inspired by what Brian was talking about with the open communication with your fan base and the people that are supporting you and the people that would be playing the game. That actually would be my ideal situation for a game, for an MMO. I think having an open conversation, especially in a part of it that you really enjoy, like for me, PvP is a big thing. Having open communication on that and the design choices and the reasons why and everything is the ideal. Like I feel like 90% of the reason why people get upset is they don't feel like they're able to find out, and as soon as they find out, people are annoyed for like 5 seconds, but they forget like 10 seconds later. And I think that open communication you've been talking about, Brian, is the one thing I would definitely want. So I feel very lucky that one thing I would change is something that's going to happen in the future.
Awesome. I mean, we know how much you want communication, though, Jake. It's been a year.
Yeah, it has been. It's been over a year.
It has. It has.
And I haven't tagged Brian once. That's the main thing.
Thank you, Jake. Yeah, it's a tough it's a tough thing to do and do well. I understand people's desire to have a lot of communication. The period of time that I did it early on, I think it was like kind of like you said in Greg's tenure, and so he was kind of setting the precedent of like, yeah, it'd be really, you know, we're going to talk to the players. I think towards the end of it, I was having like panic attacks, trying to put yourself out there and be like, you know, hey, I'm trying to make this thing better, and everybody be like, all right, now it's that person is the fixation, like they become fixated on you. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it's out of your control. Like you can't make some changes because the game is so driven. You know, it has two parts of it, right? It has PvP and PvP, PvE and PvP, and there are some constraints on you, right? You're kind of handcuffed and unable to make some certain changes, and yet everybody blames you, you know, for it. And so it was a very difficult time. And you know, people were pretty nasty, and you know, you can say, oh, you just have a thick skin and ignore it and everything. It's like, you know, you still got to see it.
Yeah.
And you can have a thick skin, you know, 99 out of 100 times, but what if one really gets you, you know? And the inverse is just not have that. And so I think when, you know, I guess my recommendation is like, if people are unhappy with the current situation, I don't think you're going to bully them into talking. Like, no. That's not going to work, right? No. Like, because I see the tweets. I see tweets of like, you know, kind of like trying to like shame, you know, because I sometimes will get looped into it, right? And and the problem is you cannot tell 10 million people to behave. Like, you're not going to be able to do that effectively. Like, you cannot change the internet. No. But I think for this community, I would just say, like, you know, probably understand that, like, bullying people into talking doesn't work. I'm not saying you're doing that, Jake, by any means. But
no, I didn't.
I see other people, you know, like it's like trying to shame Blizzard into talking. Be
Yeah.
like, oh, this other game is, so great at talking to people and stuff like that, or we haven't heard from anyone in 3 years. Like, like if everybody's doing their best, believe me.
Yeah.
They're trying really hard.
I'm
and
sure.
they care a lot. They care a lot about what you all think, and they want you all to be happy and to love the game and think the game is awesome. They want that more than anything in the world.
Of course. No, I totally believe it. I think for me, it's just a demonstration of passion rather than a kind of sort of repetitive annoyance. At least I hope it's not. It's meant to be a demonstration of passion rather than annoyance. But very well said. Very well said.
It's funny because I assumed the lack of communication, especially like response to things on forums and that, was a avoidance of the observer effect, where if somebody says something and then a blue responded to something like, or a dev responded to that thing, then that conversation automatically morphs, rather than if you just sat back and watch how that conversation organically grew by the community, then something really awesome can come out of that without even having to participate in that conversation.
Yeah, and it's true that any conversation you engage in is immediately lifted, right? And so I think, and there's just, quite honestly, there's a heavy cost. I felt like some people are really good at it and others are not. Greg, two people come to mind, Greg and Ian, and someone named Jay Gill. Very good at just banging out super eloquent, bulletproof explanations of things. I need to sit down. If I'm gonna write, I'm not an eloquent person. I have to sit down and write and be like, okay, are they going to pick apart at this or that? Because sometimes you make a mistake and somebody's going to jump on that one line mistake. And so it takes a good amount of time for some people. And some people, don't have the time. Wouldn't you rather them be working on the game? But I get it. I get the desire for engagement. Hey, talk to us. We want to know what's going on. I get all that, but it can be pretty time consuming.
Yeah, no, I get you. As I wrap this up, the one thing I want to change is I would like a new. It seems like a lot of games use a version of the ELO system for their rating and figuring it, for rated PvP to help leaderboards and figure that out. And I'd love to throw a butt ton of money at some mathematician to figure out another way to do that, because ELO kind of works, but I find you end up running into some issues in various stages of ladder play throughout a season. And then there's always that conversation about how long does the season have to be and all that stuff. And I wanted to go there, but we didn't get there, so that we'll have to put a pin in that one for the next time you're on. We'll put a little pin in that one.
Sure.
Sure. But that's one thing I would love to do. Is I'd love to find another system that is maybe better than ELO and figure that out. But
yeah, it would have been scandalous, but Marvel Snap does something I would have wanted to always do for a while, which was just it introduces bots at the lowest MMR, at the lowest ELO, so everybody's winning. You basically have and the real challenge, I think, is there's a direct correlation between the number of games you play and your rating, right? And there is not a direct correlation between it's an inverse correlation between your rating and the number of people in the world available to play against you, right? So I think people at very high rating, it's very hard to are very hard to they're like, where is everybody? There's nobody playing the game. And it's like, well, there's 10 people at your skill level in the world, and you all need to decide to play at the same time. So but yeah, I don't know if your main problem with MMR was what's the main issue you see with MMR?
Honestly, I don't have a problem with it, because I play at such a low level that I have a 3-minute queue.
Yeah. But just what you mean, the high end folks?
Yeah. It's more the high end, but also trying to get into it.
Yeah, and I think when MMRs fluctuate dramatically, but where rank one season might be 2,500 and one season might be 3,500. Right. Like, as a player, you kind of want your number to go up steadily every season, but then sometimes it doesn't, but even though you kind of proportionally did better, it's very confusing, I think, to a lot of players.
Yeah. The nice thing about I feel like there's a lot of elo systems out there. I remember Hearthstone. It was like you started like rank 25 and you go down. And actually, what I didn't like about that was like, so you hit rank 5 and you're just like you cap out. Mm-hmm. Like, at least with WoW, it's like you start at 0 and you go to some invisible number. Yeah. And now you're just kind of going up, but you might not have a sense. Like an 1,800 ranked player, he may not have a sense that like, 3,000's the at top end, right? Like, and where am I in that? They just know that like there's a reward at 2,000 that I want to get. Mm-hmm.
And WoW used to start at 1,500, right? You used to start at 1,500, then you'd either go up or go down depending on
right
what you're
yeah. But then they changed personal rating to like kind of chase rating. So
yeah. Anyway,
Anyways, I've delayed my departure. You guys have.
Yes,
and it was cool talking to you guys about all this.
This was awesome. I really appreciate it. And no joke, door is always open. So if you'd want to do this again, we'd love to have you.
Cool.
Yeah. But
thank you guys.
No worries.
All right.
You have a good one, Brian.
Thank you very much. I'll talk to you all later.
Indeed.
Thanks, Brian.
Bye. Bye. Yes, yeah.
Wow. There we go.
Indeed. Wow. That was a great conversation. Oh my goodness.
That was. It's you know what? I think I speak for all WoW players currently listening, either at home or live or everywhere in the world. Like, Brian Holinka is like the person, at least for PvP and combat design, is like the person that has like either fought for your like the thing that you want, or has been someone that you've kind of interacted with massively over a period of time. And it's such an honor and privilege to be able to kind of actually just sit down and chat as like a one-to-one, like a regular human being. Because obviously, we all are regular human beings, but you kind of have this this is someone that kind of worked on something that you actually play day in, day out. And I think that's just, it kind of blows your mind a little bit. I'm got rid of my FOMO that I had from
and this. I think people don't truly appreciate how good WoW combat is, and probably how much of an impact Holinka had on WoW combat, because if you play older games, you play different MMOs, there's this sort of clunkiness that you don't feel in WoW. Like WoW, you feel like your character has this good there's good physics to your character, the way it moves, and there's kind of a really good pacing of abilities. Pressing abilities in WoW always feels really good. And maybe you get frustrated at things that happen throughout the game, but I mean, never have I felt like when I'm playing my character that I'm having a bad time pressing the buttons. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really hard, or it's really easy to overlook that when it comes to WoW. Is just pressing the buttons feels good, right? Rotations have gotten better over the years, more complex and kind of more involved, and even a meme spec like Resterdred, I have a really fun time playing, even though I'm pressing the same buttons every game. There's sort of this rhythm that I really like. So, I think Brian was probably a huge part of developing that for WoW. As the lead combat designer, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and making sure that the classes mesh together and everything. Like, he was so high level above it. I don't think he was like making sure that a Windwalker when they did Fist of Fury did XYZ, but more making sure that whole toolkit meshed well and countered to other classes. So his knowledge level must have been huge, and definitely he definitely had a big part to it. So again, super happy that he joined us. I know it was a bit of a time coming. Lots of tweeting out him on Twitter, but I think that was probably the best it could have been, considering.
For sure.
I think let's just run into the outro of the show. First, we'll do the events and some news, and then we'll say goodbye. here we go.
Get in there and fight! Stop hiding!
Well, PvP events. So the only upcoming PvP event that I'm aware of is the global finals for the Mythic Dungeon International Great Push event. So that's the top 6 teams, top 3 from Group A and top 3 from Group B. And that is going to be happening this weekend. And they're going to be battling for a prize pool of $200,000 US. So if Group A and Group B were any sort of indication of what kind of competition this is, like, it is so high level. Even in Group B, Echo Guild didn't get first place, which they've historically done throughout every gameplay they've done. So it just blows my mind. Some of these dungeon pushes, like we're talking like an aggregated time over 6 dungeons of a minute maybe between Group 1 and Group 2, which is actually like, that comes down to seconds per dungeon. And they're pushing like 21s and 22s. It's just nuts. Yeah. Anyway, so if you're into that, enjoy it. Yes, I know it's PvE, but it's fun. Oh, and thank you, Lithy. Dungeon Dojo International will be happening soon. I don't know when. So if anybody knows, tweet it to me or go to our Discord. Let us know, and we'll happily shout it out. We like to do that. And upcoming PvP news.
All right. Who ordered up an extra large can of whoop ass?
All right, so for PvP news, we generally like to start off talking about hot fixes. There hasn't really been a lot for PvP. Well, I mean, I guess Season Discovery PvP maybe, but I haven't really seen anything for.
There was a lot of hot fixes, balancing things that happened on the beta today. A lot of stuff.
Yes,
I think that I know the build just went live. It was supposed to go live yesterday, I believe, but I think the maintenance was more than they expected. So, but now it's up. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of changes to the beta today.
Indeed. I wasn't really prepared to talk about that, but we can.
How dare you? How dare you, Garrison? I thought I was under the impression you were always prepared. Always.
Nope. Illidan has proven that wrong a number of times. Okay, so if you want, we can talk. I know one thing that came up was the self-sustainment for tanks is being reduced. I know that was talked about specifically on Wowhead. And I think so for PvE it makes sense, because I know, like, if I play my prop paladin, I can run into a dungeon, and unless I'm doing something really stupid or an ability goes off that should have been countered, generally I'm not, the healer's not really healing me most of the time. Half the time they're doing damage, which seems a little bit weird.
Yeah, it's so strange because a lot of people are freaking out about this on Twitter, and I don't really know why. Because when I watch, if you watch any Mythic Dungeon stream, usually the tank is out healing the healer on pulls. And it's just like the healer is, as you said, doing damage or spot healing when needed, pressing their cooldowns, their externals when needed. But tanks do so much healing. Like, they're so I know, like, it used to be sort of blood DKs that were the immortal tanks, because they could just death strike their way through any amount of damage. But now, like, every tank is just like insane. And I think even in some high level keys throughout the past 2 seasons, there have been really high runs where without a healer in the group, or the healer will respec in the middle of the run. So clearly tanks can handle stuff on their own. And I think the healers have been saying, at least in the forums, that they want to feel like healers again. And so they buffed HP pools, they nerfed tank survivability. Now you can be a healer again, right? And I think as a tank, being immortal isn't necessarily a good thing. I mean, I guess makes you feel really good, but
it makes you feel really powerful. My concern, though, is from a PvP perspective, is right now tanks in PvP take more damage. right? There's a bunch of modifiers against them. So if now their damage mitigation is reduced and they have no self-healing or minimal self-healing, then what's that going to look like in PvP, especially in battlegrounds where you need tanks to, for doing flag running and that, unless they're going to get rid of that completely and maybe, or get rid of those nerfs, or even go the way of the battleground blitz where non-tanks actually get a slight buff to their durability so that they can flag run as, because now they're not taking as much damage.
There was I believe it was in, and I think in Warlords of Draenor there weren't tanks in RBGs for some reason. I don't remember why.
It's because of rogues. Burst of speed was just too OP.
Rogues are the FCs. Okay, so there's really no reason to have a tank. Okay, gotcha. Because I never remember Legion as the demon hunters are like leaping across the map and stuff. Warlords of Draenor, they didn't use tanks because the rogues could just do it and get across the map so fast. And then I think that got nerfed or what. And then demon hunters became it because they could do so many other things, and they were just OP. And then flags and Guardian Druids and
Guardian Druids. But I think at the same time, that's about when they added in, when you held a flag, it became dead weight, so then you couldn't go as fast. So it slowed you down. They started doing things like that because the demon hunter ability, when you're a tank, where there's a PvP ability where you do like a burst of speed, and you can in one direction, like you can't really, you have to stop you have to stop casting it or remove the buff in order to drop out of that form. And when you're carrying the flag, you actually go slower than if you're running. Like it's just ridiculous. So that was a hot fix, I remember, because it was ridiculous trying to catch a demon hunter at first. Anyways, so I think that was one of the big things that I saw as well that came up from these beta patch notes. Again, I'm not sure. I didn't really read a lot of other things. Is there anything else that jumped out to you guys from the beta patch notes?
I mean, not me personally, because I haven't been as invested in the War Within so far. I'm sure as the season ends and we get into the new expansion, I will be. But yeah, I wouldn't say I have any input. I'd say Big's got the better.
It seems like they buffed a lot of healers today.
Yeah.
So,
but I think that's the flip side. I think that they did that to counter the tank nerfing, right?
Yeah, probably. Actually, that makes perfect sense. So they buffed a lot of healers. Not a lot of other miscellaneous. I mean, we're seeing now, I think, the start of PvP changes.
Yeah.
On the beta.
Okay.
So of course, the stacking deserter debuff, which you talked about before the show.
Yes.
Actually, Brian gave us some insight about why all these years AFKing a solo shuffle wouldn't put your whole account as a no-show, and it was because of technological limitations, that they had nothing on the technology side to make that happen. So there's probably some new tech that was developed at Blizzard for making it so now if you AFK a solo shuffle, your entire account is debuffed. Before that wasn't possible with the technology, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it was great for him to give us that little insight. He was actually quite excited during the pre-show when we were talking, and he saw that. He's like, "Oh my god, they did that! Awesome!" And he's like, "Yeah." So it makes sense. I mean, yeah,
that's good. I was, to be honest, really worried about people AFKing in BG Blitz specifically because there's in Solo Shuffle there's 6 players, in BG Blitz there's 16. So the likelihood of someone AFKing is double almost. I don't know how that statistically works, but you know what I mean. So yeah, I'm glad that because I think it's really rude to AFK unless you have to save your cat from a burning building or something, right? Don't leave it. Don't be a jerk and leave a game because you're frustrated. That's awful.
What I was going to say about the League of Legends thing from earlier, that although I did make the suggestion, like having a really long match, I remember the thing that drew me always to PvP Arena in WoW was that it was like done in like 5 minutes. Whereas like I play a League game, you know, someone comes in from my family is like, Jake, we need you, come quickly. I'm like, I can't AFK right now, otherwise they're gonna ban my account. You know, it's kind of like, you know, you sort of the things you suffer from that stage. Whereas if I was playing an arena game, I'd be like, yeah, give me like 1 second, either I die or we'd like win, and then you can go off and do stuff as needed. And I think that's the thing that's so good from that smaller angle, in reverse to something like League.
Unlike in a BG where you're there for another 10 minutes because yeah. Anyway, I think those are some big ones. While you were talking, I did scroll through the player versus player. I'm seeing a lot of no longer reduced, no longer modified items. So so I'm wondering if they're removing a bunch of the tuning that was in place during Dragonflight to then get a sense to what the actual abilities do, and then they'll reintroduce tuning as they need to. So
yeah, probably they're probably just trying to get a clean slate to it sounds like
that's my guess,
because I imagine it's like the more things you have being multiplied, it makes things a bit confusing. So it's just like erase one of those multipliers across the board and then readjust after. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. I think the one other piece of news is kind of news, but there's a new team trying to form. Well, it has formed for the War Within AWC, and that's going to be Prev, Drizzy, Cubsy, and Nick, the Rogue, have joined forces. And Drizzy made a tweet looking for sponsors, so not sure what that if they've gotten somebody or not. Hopefully they did. But either way, I think that is going to be a powerhouse of a team come the War Within.
Yeah,
agreed. Massively so, yeah.
I think Trill was talking about it on stream. He was scared.
Well, if Trill's scared, then there's something there. Yeah. I wonder if we'll see, Rogue versus Rogue, see some mirror matches. That'd be pretty cool. All right. I think on that, let's do some shout outs and then we'll do the outro. So on to you, Big. Anybody you want to shout out?
Shout out to add-on developers right now, because I know the beta has been a mess. And shout out to everyone who's been keeping their add-ons up to date for the beta. It's been very helpful for me to test the game.
That's a really good shout out. Jake?
I'm just going to shout out to everyone that's been very supportive of me in the last couple of weeks or so. I'll leave it at that, but much appreciated. Obviously, both of you as well, much appreciated. So thank you to everyone for that.
Yeah. My heart broke when I heard that news. So I feel...
No, I appreciate all the support, honestly.
Yeah. I think for shoutouts, I'm going to shout out Brian, because not only did he join us today, but he also subscribed to the channel and gave it a Prime Prime subscription. Yeah, so I'm sure Bonus Roll will enjoy that little bit of money, since ultimately it's I think the whole production thing is a net loss for those that run it. So every little bit helps, but I'm sure they'll appreciate that. I know I appreciate it.
PvP finally coming in, giving them the money to bonus roll. They get their bonus bit of cash. You're welcome, team.
All right, Big, can you roll us out and tell everybody where they can find us?
Yes, I can. You can find us, or contact us rather, directly with a tweet to @technically_PvP, or by an email to technicallypvp@gmail.com. You can also join our discussions on the Bonus Roll Productions Discord.
And you can visit the Bonus Roll website to find the podcast directory with us and many other great shows at www.bonusroll.gg. This directory also has a review system, so head on over there and tell everyone what you think of your favorite shows, including our own.
Indeed. And links for everything we talked about are going to be in the show notes, like always. I want to thank you all for listening. We'll chat with you next time. Good night, everybody.
See ya.